Hello and welcome to the third podcast of SfS, Smoke and Fire Safety. Here with you have Marco, Marketing and Product Manager for SfS, part of Exyte Hargreaves. We are here to offer our expertise from design to commissioning of smoke control systems. We are highly committed with supporting the construction industry, and we want to get and share different perspectives and insights from the experts we work with on a daily basis, providing an understanding of what is happening to our fast-paced changing industry. Aim of these podcasts is to listen to the expert opinion. SfS will be completely and absolutely impartial. For any question and project involving smoke control, we want to be your focal point of knowledge. Therefore, get in touch with us. Today, here with us, we have Jairo Jaramillo from HDR, an employee-owned design firm specializing in engineering, architecture, environmental, and construction services, counting more than 11,000 people all over the world. Can I now ask you, Jairo, to introduce yourself?
Yeah, good afternoon, Marco. Thank you very much for the opportunity. Good to see you again after, was it probably about a few weeks ago that we saw each other at the City Gala. So I am an associate mechanical engineer here at HDR, and I've been in the industry I've entered the industry in February 2011 and have been with HDR now almost 9 years by the end of this year. Doing a variety of projects, mostly the high-end residential sector, but also dabbling in commercial sector and retail as well. Yeah, that's my story.
That's quite interesting. So we have a decade of experience, and you did say when you wanted to do this podcast with us, you had two topics you wanted to approach. I think the first one is technologies. So how these are used in the projects and what's the evolution you've seen all over these years. And I think the second topic we can talk about today, it's soft factors such as networking, public speaking, and also mentoring. Am I right with this?
Yeah, that's correct, Marco. I think, love the opportunity again to be on the, thank you very much for the opportunity to be on the podcast. It's something a little bit different. You've had two Pauls so far, I noted from listening to the previous ones. And listening to them, I was struck by this advice. You guys are very much at the forefront at the moment when we talk about technology and how things are changing in our sector. And every sort of technology and what we do in construction, it's so vast that bits of it are always changing all the time. But of course, having been in it for over 10 years now, certainly I think everyone in the construction industry can point to the watershed moment for our industry has certainly been Grenfell. So I think with regards to smoke and fire safety, there is a lot of information coming out, and you guys are sort of at the forefront as well of the education aspect of it, of especially say with dampers, fire dampers, different classifications, how to install them correctly and specify them correctly. That's just one of sort of those examples of how the technology has changed or is changing recently. But in taking it back to when I first started, I think it's quite interesting to see how over the 10 years things, obviously, it being just my own personal viewpoint, it's an experience. Things haven't almost changed that much. The technologies never become too revolutionary. I remember when I first came in and chilled beams as a method of cooling, certainly office spaces were gaining a lot of traction. I remember taking maybe to stage 2 a job on it, and it was felt the fan cool units weren't going to survive. And then you had the advances in electric motors, and all of a sudden they came racing back to the fore. I think that the job can be characterized by the technologies don't change that much, but what has happened is the pressures that drive their application. So what are the main drivers? What are the main factors that a client will want to hit? And there I certainly think that what has happened is I've noticed how it's become way more sustainability driven over the last 5 to 6 years. Suddenly it's the case of my plant, what are its specific fan powers, what is its embodied carbon, these sorts of changes in the technology. So perhaps whilst the very basic premises of what we do, the fundamentals, the thermodynamics, the fluid mechanics of what we do hasn't changed in many dozens of years, the actual behind the scenes, the manufacturers are always bringing in those efficiencies. It's now extremely important for us to be able to say, over the holistic consideration of a project. Where is the reduction in carbon? Where is the reduction in energy use and harm that is done? So I think that's from a sort of point of view of the actual plant being used. When you look at processes, the big thing, of course, is building information modeling. And that can mean many things to many people. But I do recall starting at Building Design Partnership in 2011 and 2012 and working with Revit software. And this was obviously 3D modeling, and it felt very futuristic at the time. And I have sort of been surprised at how there is still a space in this work for 2D drawings, of course. But what has happened increasingly, and certainly here for HDR, the last sort of 3, 4, 5 years, the accessibility of a relatively cost-effective 3D working and a capability has increased. So it's now a tool which is way more accessible at the level of someone like me, as opposed to one of our specially trained Revit coordinators. So our processes, our ability to visualize things is improving. I think the other thing to add would probably be the amount of data. We, of course, live in the era of big data. And when you look at it from the point of view of building services, of course, we're looking always to address the performance gap, what a building does and how it actually performs versus how it was designed and intended to perform. And I think that availability of data is increasing, is huge, and is very exciting, because in the future, or now and in the future, of course, we will be held way more accountable to our designs, and we are able to, looking through aspects like digital twin, we have an excellent team doing that here. We're getting closer and closer almost to that sort of, here is my building live, what is it actually doing? I wish to zoom in on certain areas, let's produce reports. And of course, the first step of being able to assess our projects and design better is knowing what we've done in the past. So yeah, I'd say that's sort of the advances that I've seen. And I think bringing it back to, of course, your area of expertise and your employer's area of expertise, we are seeing, as I said when I mentioned earlier about Grenfell, it's always at the forefront of our minds how safety conscious some of what we do is. But even more so now, and I think the early engagement with fire engineering companies, fire engineering and smoke ventilation and the like, and safety equipment manufacturers is becoming more and more important. You guys, literally, I've been on projects where you have the power to say, you need more risers, you need less risers, you need this kind of ventilation strategy. And the core, we are just seeing it change in front of our very eyes at very early REBA stages, which of course is how it should be, because trying to incorporate, of course, those sort of decisions and your advice later on is where it becomes very difficult.
Just want to pick up from a few things you mentioned. Yes. My background is architecture, and I also remember my first steps into the industry. That was back in 2007, 2008. So it was literally very primordial to talk about BIM. And I remember I started swapping from AutoCAD into an alternative to Revit that was called Allplan. Still a BIM software, but at that stage, yeah, you're right. We were using it just like a 3D visualization tool rather than fully understanding the potentiality and what actually a tool like that can provide you in terms of control, in terms of listing, in terms of exporting information. So we're absolutely not aware of the power that such a big branch software could take into our industry. And I think one of the key step changes that maybe not in 2008, I think around about 2012, 2013, it came in, and that's the integration. So as soon as the technology was embraced by consultancy firms, actually this integration, so exchanging these BIM models became much easier, and people really started, I think, to realize the power of creating BIM and sharing data.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think it's thinking back to the sort of times that you were mentioning, sort of 2012, 2013, it was still perhaps an acceptable response to go into a project as a consultant and say, I work in 2D. And if the architect came along with 3D, we were always, of course, accustomed to having architects who would have better visuals than us. But it's now no longer acceptable to do that. With BIM execution plans and agreements at the beginning at the outset of projects, it is possible to say we haven't priced for that, and we will we will work in a 2D environment and we will produce 2D outputs. However, it is not acceptable anymore to say we will not interact with 3D, we don't understand it. It has moved on, as you say, that embracing of the technology has certainly improved and increased, and hopefully that's what sort of first of many steps towards getting us to where, as you said, the technology and the power should be taking us, or where we should be with it. But as you know, the construction industry is a powerful but slow beast. The inertia is high there.
Yeah, I think one of the key introductions back, I think, in those days was the understanding of clash detection. Because I remember we were designing a very large public building, but we were using this BIM modeling, very primordial. But I still remember our structural engineers were detailing everything in AutoCAD 2D. Our HVAC designers as well, they just sent us 2D drawings, sometimes in PDF as well. So we had to convert them into AutoCAD and then import them into the BIM software. And
The funds of formatting, yes. Yeah.
yeah, so I think we live in a very fortunate period in a way now that really gives no excuses to cut on quality and do not look into a building in a proper way. I want to pick up another thing you did mention, and it's hardware. Do you think there has been changes maybe in some of the software behind hardware?
So do you mean, I think if you're talking about the sort of control software, BMS, it's not really my area of expertise, but I imagine, of course, that there has been. I think when it comes to, if your question is more, say, about something which is more within my wheelhouse, as it were, which is the process, the way of managing teams, the way of productivity software, the way of producing drawings and stuff, then yes, absolutely. I think the easier availability of, say, software as a service, of online services, of productivity software has improved. I think going back to sort of the big data question, the amount of sort of data points that a large employer and management can take on, well, what are we doing? What are we doing with this staff, with this sort of team? And that has definitely has improved. I mean, I was always ready to embrace the paperless office. And I remember arriving, and I still did. I remember arriving and working in Visio when I arrived at BDP, and that quickly moved on to Bluebeam, which is what we use here, and the ability to manipulate PDFs and quickly create sketches. That's very key. So the software which is available for me to do my work has certainly improved. And now we're part of a larger company. We also have much better access to, and more, I'd say, affordable access to the kind of software that assists us in our tasks.
Picking up a different thing you just mentioned, so carbon emission reduction. So, for example, if we travel on a plane, we can maybe pay a couple of extra pounds and then exchange these carbon quotas. So, carbon seems like it's a big thing, from transportation to buildings to every stage of our 24/7 lives. So, specifically when it comes to buildings, what do we actually mean with reducing the carbon emissions, and how do you really optimize your designs?
Well, I mean, it is the big thing, and I think what I set out to be is realistic about how big a part of the pie I can really interact with when it comes to carbon reduction. But for us, it comes down to choosing, as far as possible, the most efficient systems, most efficient plants, and trying to do as many things from a sort of a passive point of view, using the sustainability sort of hierarchy, which I forget off the top of my head, but it's the classic sort of, first of all, you sort of be lean, be green. There might be a be mean in there, but we do start off being able to see the early REBA stages. It is a case of, right, well, what are we producing? What is the orientations of our buildings? How can we first of all make a good start? Then it becomes a case of ensuring that we are choosing trying to choose emerging technologies which globally for the building take as much carbon reduction as possible. And what we found now is increasingly important, and manufacturers are asking us about, is EPDs. They're sort of embodied carbon calculations for a piece of kit. So if I'm choosing a condenser from manufacturer A versus manufacturer B, and I have the information to say during the whole life cycle assessment of manufacturer A's condenser manufacture, there's so much tons of CO2 produced versus what manufacturer B is doing. So I think, say, for us, the key things are passive measures, trying to advise the client on starting off on the right foot. And then when it starts getting into the nitty gritty and the later stages, choosing the right plant and choosing the right sort of systems. So, I mean, in London now, what has become very clear is that the combustion is a dirty word in London, really. Almost overnight, it felt like we are no longer looking at natural gas boilers or CHP. And it's very much everyone is looking at electric, because whilst the capacity on the infrastructure is running to catch up, it is the infrastructure that is going to be decarbonised. It's much easier to decarbonise electricity production directly rather than, say, for instance, natural gas production. That's sort of the tools at our disposal. And now, when you then look at once a building has been built, we spoke before about big data, about post-occupancy evaluations, the performance gap. It's then looking at measuring what we've done. It felt like previously these were much more sort of theoretical exercises, where we will now have the data and the building stock to be able to say, well, that worked in that way before. We've learned lessons from that. Let's now apply them going forward even more. And of course, clients also lead this as well. They have the stock, they have the building portfolios, and they can say to us, perhaps it's the first time that we're working with them, but we have done this and we have seen that this works for us. And then, of course, we can assess. So that those are the main tools for us in carbon reduction of carbon. And when you look at what the building industry, of course, as a whole in a country like the UK contributes a very large portion of our total emissions, it's vitally important work. It feels increasing so, and it's one of the best parts, I think, of the job, is knowing that at that incredibly important effort worldwide that exists, you're at the forefront of that and you're playing an important part in it.
You're absolutely right. And I think one of the outcomes of what you just said is that we are moving towards what I like to call a green, data-driven society equipped with blue electricity. So literally, yes, I'm really seeing this change even here up in Manchester. So everywhere we are, in a way, transitioning to something hopefully greener and better for the future.
Definitely.
Now, I would like to investigate with you a little bit what we call social skills, soft factors, mentoring. So, what's your experience with these?
Well, I'm very fortunate in having had a very positive experience in that respect. I studied mechanical engineering at university. I consider myself very fortunate to have been able to apply what I studied, then turn it into a career. We're 11 years down the line. I wouldn't stick with something so long if I wasn't enjoying it. But I think mentoring is extremely important. I've had one solid mentor. Well, I've had many, but there's been one long-standing. I've worked with him. I mention his name, not embarrass him, but having my career is incredibly important to me. It's a profession. Given the hours that we do, it's so important, I think, to enjoy what you do, enjoy the holy trinity perhaps of it is to be able to enjoy what you do, enjoy where you do it, and enjoy who you do it with. And I can categorically say that I do all three. In terms of working, enjoying who I do my work with, mentoring is incredibly important. It's a huge influence. There's an element, I think, of paying it forward. I look at the sector and it really only has longevity and a future, our sector, if people are doing that sort of informal training and that informal, assistance of one another. I've had many instances in my career when I run up against issues, and they can range from, I've never done this sort of damper before, I've never used this kind of hydronic system, to I'm in real issues here with where the direction of my career. I think I'm maybe a bit listless. I don't know how to get chartered. And mentorship can be a very short-term thing, and it can be a long-term thing. It can be assistance being provided by colleagues at the moment, and it can also be someone like I have who keeps an eye on my career and really is always there and is dependable and can give advice. And we never really know, because you can never really ask the question directly of someone, are you shaping my career? Are you sort of a bit Machiavellian in it? But I like to think, I put almost a faith in it, that mentor has my best interests at heart and can guide me and provide that guidance on correct career choices, areas of improvement, sort of thing. And to work with someone like that is incredibly empowering. So I've recently become a manager myself. I have someone reporting to me, and it's having had that good experience I hope to emulate that. I have that as a grounding. I have learned that, and I hope to be able to repeat that with them and provide them with a worthwhile and satisfying career.
And in your opinion, what are the best qualities that we should be looking at when we are looking for a mentor for our careers?
It's a great question. I think a mentor, of course, by its very nature, is very subjective. It's very personal to you. But I think mentors come in many different shapes and sizes. There can be a variety. I think good listeners. I think you have to be able to respect them. They have to be able to listen to you, and those are probably the two main ones. Because if you want someone who's mentoring you on your career, then they can have several sort of qualities. They could, of course, be someone who's very technically adept, so you want to learn from them technically. But they could also be just someone who has a very good leadership style, or they could be someone who always seems to be very level-headed in times of conflict or in high-stress situations. And already there's three different people who are three different qualities that I imagine most people would want to pick up as they're progressing in their job. So let's call it, I'd say, the ability to listen and someone you respect. I think those are the two main ones. Yeah.
What I observed over the last 3 to 4 years with regards to mentorship is that certain companies may be offering a mentorship program where one of your colleagues maybe can be your mentor or your buddy, or can actually sit and work with you in a very productive way and teaching you on how to progress with things in your career. But I also noticed that, for example, the CAM, the Chartered Institute of Marketing, are offering, for example, their expertise. So they also offer mentorship programs. Now, what do you think? Is it better to have an internal mentor, so someone working in the same company with you, or someone external who might actually give you a different insight or a different view on things? Or maybe there's just not a role?
I think it's a really good point. I think for me personally, as I was saying previously, where a mentorship or a mentor can be many people. I think whatever works for anyone, but I definitely think there is some value to be had for asking questions and interacting through networking with people from different sectors, different parts of your same sector. If you look at construction industry, for instance, I love speaking to people within my company, of course, my colleagues. And then I remember speaking, with you at the Yen, at the SfS Yen Gala and the careers fair. Suddenly, it's that osmosis. It's talking to others and mentoring. As I said, for me, it could be a short-term or a very long-term thing. It could be a little spark. It could be a question of, oh, we were doing this and we learned this, and suddenly someone that you're speaking to for the first time chips in with some knowledge. And all of a sudden, that is gained. That's that conversation that's been had. That's the power of the network. And I think if you do that sufficiently, and it grows wider and wider, you get those different sort of experiences and the benefit of that different knowledge. So yeah, when organizations are given these kind of opportunities, I think if you can do to take them is a really good idea. Mentoring comes from so many different sources, and most people will say that they maybe have perhaps one or two main people, but then they'd be surprised when they look over many years, they look at the skills that they've learned. Where has that actually come from? Who have I looked to for that? And they could find themselves that it's actually across many different spheres of influence and many different sectors and opportunities.
I think you're absolutely right. And one of the things, for example, in my career, I'm looking at every day. Also, sometimes when I stop and reflect on what I'm doing, so I think those transferable skills I've learned, probably, you're right, they're not always coming from just an individual or just from one or two mentors. We constantly, I think, learn every day. We learn by mistakes for sure, and we do mistakes every day. If we don't do mistakes, as I like to think, probably we're not working or we're not doing things right, because that's I think
Absolutely, yeah. It's a happy consultant is one who is learning. It's well, I'd say not just a consultant, a person who is learning through their life daily, day to day. Every day is a school day, I think, is a happy proverb. It's the ideal situation to be in. in a sector, bringing it back to like a sector like ours, there's so much different technology, there's so many applications, there's so many systems. To try and be a subject matter expert on all of them is completely impossible. And the more interaction that you can have with people who have that expertise or who have that experience, have that learning, it rubs off. So I'd say a big believer, as you said, and as you said, in networking and having those different conversations and being curious above all else. Really, when you meet these people, asking the questions, it's the type of learning that works for me. So,
have you recently spoke in a public environment? So, did you go to any conference and maybe presented some of your work, or what can you share from that perspective?
Well, I have actually. Our company is based in Omaha, and a large contingent of our London office were there for the staff conference. And when we came back, I wasn't actually presenting there. I got made aware actually that there was an opportunity, but another name had gone forward. When we came back, we were basically asked, my colleague Connor and I were asked to kind of transmit to the rest of the staff, those who hadn't been lucky enough to attend, what we'd been up to, what it meant to us. So that was a presentation, I think, of about 7 or 8 minutes long, with about 6 or 7 slides, where I was presenting to the office about that. So that was very much, again, sort of a soft factors, what I remembered, what it meant for me, how I would take it forward. But yeah, public speaking is so important. The ability to communicate effectively as an engineer. You are constantly, a part of the job every day is getting across your ideas either to a colleague or to a layman's audience. So you're always having to tweak the detail and the delivery style in what you do. So it's, yeah, the opportunities are many. People perhaps think they don't do as much public speaking as they actually do, but any design team meeting within this career is an opportunity and is a platform for doing your public speaking. A lot of people, of course, express, I think, apprehension and fear about doing it to larger audiences, and unfortunately, that's where I do enjoy doing that sort of thing. Yeah, the opportunities, as you mentioned, to do those things of recent have been quite numerous. Certainly within the office and the company, and then on previous occasions, I've also had when I was part of SfS's Young Engineer Network. I had 3 or 4 opportunities to do discussions and present at events.
We have time now for the last question, Jairo. And what do you reckon has been the biggest change and where that big change led us to, or where it's leading us to in the future?
Certainly, I think to recall a very unfortunate event, what happened with the pandemic, I think has led to the biggest change in working practice that I've seen, not only in my industry, but across many sectors, of course, and that is the introduction and the mass acceptance by a lot of employers of teleconferencing, working from home, remote working. When I joined the industry, of course, it was very much about presenteeism. You were in the office, teleconferencing, video conferencing facilities were very exotic affairs. I think they were used by very large consultancies and practices for working across time zones. And even then, they were riddled with glitches and they were very unreliable. Fast forward to what we're looking at now, of course, and it's fascinating, of course, to see, for a while, of course, we were all stuck at home. I was very fortunate enough to be able to continue working as a consultant. Even if I needed to visit sites, those were still kept open as well. But we're now looking at, most employers have to look at offering something like a free, 2 or 3 days working from home in a week. That's part of it. And it's funny, if I'd been going in as a graduate now, I think I would have suffered 2-3 years ago from the lack of face time. It's very important when you're starting out a career to have that time with your peers, to be able to get those that mentoring, as we spoke about previously. But looking at it now, I'm a new dad, and I really appreciate the ability to just have those sort of stolen moments with my daughter. I'm working at home, of course. I'm not babysitting, but if she's around the house, then you're suddenly getting more time with your child, as opposed to seeing them at 7:30 and then going back to see them at 6 o'clock when you get back from a normal office day. So I think that flexibility that has now been introduced, I'd like to think certainly with the consultancy sector, and how people have, certainly I've been able to approach a better work-life balance. I think that's the biggest change. And going forward, that acceptance of that working style, it's a real game changer. It's a real, again, a watershed moment, and we'll see how it goes ahead and which employers best adapt to it. But yeah, I think that's the main one.
I'm fully on board with you. I think if there's one of the positive things out of 2 years of 2 very long years of pandemic, yes, actually that's it. So in 2023, we will be talking more and more about well-being, mental health, and all these topics which are quite constant, even on scrolling our LinkedIn feeds every day. So thanks for that.
Thank you very much, Marco.
Unless you have anything else you want to add, I would like to say thank you very much, Jairo, for joining us on this podcast. I think you gave us a very broad and very solid, I think, view of what's your experience and where did your last 10 to 12 years of your career brought you to. And I think you're in a very successful and strong position. So thanks for that, and we wish you all the best for the future. Thanks very much for listening. Stay tuned with SFS on our podcast platforms, and talk to you next month. See you.